Laughter began near the ammo racks, a harsh sound that scraped across the polished concrete floor of Fort Liberty's training center. It echoed off walls adorned with awards for shooting skills and team honors. This wasn't friendly laughter, it was a cruel, knowing amusement coming from those who felt entirely justified in their scorn. "What in the world did you just do?" Captain Derek Hawkins marched forward, his ranger tab glinting under the lights. He stood 6 feet, 2 inches tall, an infantry officer fresh from his 3rd tour. His sharp jawline looked sculpted for military posters. His boots struck the floor with a steady, commanding rhythm, as if the ground itself should yield before him. The woman he addressed barely reached his chest, a small figure at 5 feet, 2 inches. She wore the drab gray jumpsuit of the maintenance crew, a uniform designed to make its wearer blend into the background. A worn baseball cap, pulled low, hid most of her face. Her name tag, Chen, hung slightly crooked on her pocket. She had simply reached out, adjusting the way a young specialist held his M4 rifle. It was a small correction, the kind any skilled shooter would offer without thinking. She started. "You were only what?" Captain Jennifer Walsh appeared by Hawkins's side, her intelligence officer badge shining with the precise brilliance of someone who polished it daily. She crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping from the maintenance worker's scuffed boots to her oil-stained cap. "You're the cleaning staff. Your job is to collect empty shell casings and scrub floors, not to instruct soldiers on their weapons." 32 people in the waiting area turned to watch. It was Saturday morning, a qualification day, meaning a full house. Active duty soldiers were updating their records, reservists crammed in practice time, and instructors performed final checks before the courses began. The main hall hummed with the focused energy of military professionals ready to demonstrate their abilities. Sarah Chen slowly lowered her hand and stepped back. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, nothing remarkable at all, except for the quiet way she absorbed the sudden attention on her small form. "My apologies, I didn't mean to what?" Major Tom Bradley rose from a metal bench where he'd been reviewing the day's schedule. 20 years of weapons training had etched permanent lines around his eyes and a constant note of disdain into his voice. "What precisely do you know about an M4 that allows you to correct anyone's stance?" Lieutenant Ryan Peters, a West Point graduate from 2023, barely 6 months out of his basic training, chuckled from near the water cooler. "She probably watched a video online last night." The group around him joined in, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls and high ceiling, sounding like distant gunfire in an enclosed space. Sarah remained still, but something shifted behind her eyes. A quick, precise movement as her gaze swept the room with mechanical accuracy. Without turning her head, she mentally mapped every exit, gauged the distance to each cluster of people, noted the positions of the 3 armed guards at the entrance, the emergency alarm panel, and the sight lines from every corner. Old instincts, the kind that never truly faded. In the far corner, partly hidden by a pillar, a man with graying hair looked up from his clipboard. The eagles on his collar identified him as a full colonel, with a range master insignia below them. His eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the unfolding confrontation near the equipment rack. No one else noticed his watchful presence, but in the next 20 minutes, everything in this room was going to change. Hawkins stepped closer, intentionally invading Sarah's personal space. The scent of his expensive, aggressive aftershave filled the small gap between them. "Well, we're waiting for an explanation. What makes a cleaning lady believe she can teach combat soldiers anything about firearms?" Sarah's reply was soft, almost apologetic. "I noticed his supporting hand position could cause issues during continuous firing. The barrel would tend to rise high." "Barrel drift," Walsh scoffed, pulling out her phone, its screen lighting up her smirk. Listen to her using technical terms. "Where did you learn those?" "From a video game." More laughter followed, louder this time. Specialist Torres, the young soldier Sarah had tried to help, shifted uneasily near the weapon rack. His face flushed, though it was unclear if from embarrassment at being corrected, or from sympathy for the woman now enduring the group's collective contempt. "Ma'am, she was just," he began. "No one asked you, specialist." Bradley's voice cracked like a whip. "Eyes front. Focus on your own duties." Torres snapped back to attention, his protest dying in his throat. Sarah watched the interaction with that same unsettling stillness. When she finally moved, it was to push her maintenance cart towards the far side of the room, a clear retreat from the conflict. But as she walked, her back straightened almost imperceptibly, her shoulders squaring under the shapeless jumpsuit. Her steps fell with a precision too exact for a civilian cleaner. Sergeant First Class Elena Rodriguez, waiting near the sign-in desk for her own turn to qualify, tilted her head. 14 years in the Army had taught her to spot details others missed. This maintenance worker's way of moving through the space didn't fit her uniform or her apparent job. Rodriguez filed the observation away and returned her attention to the clipboard in her hands. Near the memorial wall, a section of the training center dedicated to soldiers from the region who had died in service. A man in civilian clothes straightened from studying the photograph. Retired Sergeant Major Frank Williams, 73 years old, had been coming to this range since before most of these young officers were born. The regulars called him Papa Williams, and his presence carried the weight of someone who had seen more combat than everyone else in the room combined. His weathered eyes followed Sarah Chen as she pushed her cart past the weapon lockers. Something about her tugged at his memory, a familiar efficiency in her movements, a constant awareness of her surroundings that civilian jobs rarely demanded. But the moment passed, and Papa Williams returned his attention to the young faces in the photographs before him. The confrontation should have ended there. A small humiliation administered, the social order reasserted, the proper military hierarchy maintained. The officers would complete their firing rounds. The maintenance worker would clean up afterwards. Everyone would go home, content with their place in the established system. But Captain Derek Hawkins was never satisfied with small victory. He caught up with Sarah near the equipment storage area, his boots echoing loudly against the concrete. "Hey, cleaning lady, we're not finished." Sarah paused but didn't turn around. "I believe you owe Specialist Torres an apology. You embarrassed him in front of his peers with your little correction," Hawkins said, making air quotes. "And you embarrassed yourself by pretending to know something you clearly don't." "I apologize already, Captain. Not to my satisfaction." He circled around to face her, blocking her path with his large frame. Behind him, Walsh held her phone up, clearly recording. Bradley and Peters drifted closer, forming a loose circle around their target. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos emerged from the weapons vault, a clipboard of serial numbers clutched to her chest. The armorer took one look at the scene unfolding near her area and froze. It was the stillness of someone who recognized trouble, but hadn't yet decided whether to step in. "Tell you what," Hawkins continued, his voice ringing clearly across the hall. "Since you seem to know so much about M4s, why don't you prove it? Show us what you've got." Sarah's dark brown, unremarkable eyes met his briefly before looking away. "I'm just maintenance staff. That's not my place." "See, that's where you're mistaken." Bradley stepped forward, his credentials as a weapons instructor lending a false sense of authority to what quickly became organized bullying. "You made it your place when you touched that soldier's weapon. Now you have to back up your action." "A technical quiz," Peters piped up eagerly. "Name the parts. Explain how it fires. Basic stuff any real shooter would know." Walsh zoomed in with her phone camera. "This is going to be incredible footage. Cleaning lady thinks she's a gun expert." Across the hall, Rodriguez and Santos exchanged glances. Neither moved to intervene. The difference in their ranks made intervention professionally risky, but their attention remained fixed on the developing scene. Sarah Chen stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds. Her breathing remained even, her expression neutral, but beneath her calm exterior, something cold and precise was assessing the situation with tactical clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice still held that soft, almost apologetic tone. "What would you like me to explain?" Hawkins grinned. "Bradley, grab a rifle from the rack. Let's see what our expert knows about basic parts." The weapons instructor retrieved a training M4 from nearby storage. The magazine was out, the chamber flagged, temporarily harmless with orange safety marker. He thrust it towards Sarah with more force than necessary. She caught it smoothly, not fumbling, not grabbing awkwardly, but catching it with an instinctively correct grip that made Bradley's eyes narrow for a split second, before he dismissed what he'd seen. "Go ahead," Hawkins gestured grandly. "Break it down for us. Explain how the big, scary gun works." Sarah turned the weapon over in her hands, her fingers tracing familiar lines and angles. This is the M4A1 carbine variant, she began, deliberately making her voice sound hesitant. A shorter version of the M16, gas-operated, air-cooled, with a firing rate of about 700 to 950 rounds per minute. Basic information you'd find online, Walsh commented from behind her phone. The upper receiver holds the bolt carrier group, charging handle and barrel assembly, Sarah continued as if she hadn't heard the interruption. The lower receiver contains the trigger mechanism, magazine well and fire control group. The standard magazine holds 30 rounds of 506mm NATO ammunition. Anyone could look that up on the internet. Peter scoffed. But Bradley had stopped smiling. Something about the way the maintenance worker handled the weapon bothered him. The effortless confidence of her grip, the automatic way she kept the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. These weren't things learned from online videos. This was ingrained behavior. Take it apart, he ordered, his voice sharper now. Field strip it. Let's see if your hands know as much as your mouth. Sarah paused, a show of uncertainty that lasted just long enough to appear genuine. I don't want to cause any trouble. Too late for that. Hawkins crossed his arm. Strip the weapon, or admit you're a fraud who doesn't know what she's talking about. The waiting area had fallen silent. 32 pairs of eyes watched as Sarah Chen turned the M4 over one more time, her expression hidden by the shadow of her cap. Then she began. Her hands moved with the effortless efficiency of someone who had performed this action countless times. She pushed the pins, separated the upper from the lower receiver, removed the charging handle and bolt carrier group, extracted the firing pin and bolt cam pin, and disassembled the bolt itself. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no visible thought. The entire sequence took 58 seconds. Hawkins's triumphant look faltered. 58 seconds wasn't exceptional for a trained soldier, but it was faster than most civilians could manage, and far smoother than the fumbling he'd expected from a cleaner. Lucky, he declared. Beginner's luck. She probably practiced at some public range. The record for this facility is 52 seconds, Santos said quietly from her spot near the weapons vault. Several heads turned towards the armorer, blindfolded. The word hung in the air like an unspoken dare. Walsh lowered her phone slightly. No way. Do it, Bradley heard himself say, the instructor in him suddenly curious despite his earlier mockery. If you truly know this weapon, do it blindfolded. Sarah looked at the disassembled M4 parts spread across the maintenance cart. Her face revealed nothing. No fear, no confidence, nothing to show what she was about to do. I don't think she's scared. Peters laughed. Just afraid to show she's a fake. Rodriguez stepped closer, her curiosity finally overcoming her hesitation to get involved. I can provide a blindfold, she offered, holding out a clean bandana from her kit. Sarah accepted the folded cloth with a small nod. The training center's main hall fell completely silent as Sarah Chen tied the blindfold around her eye. She checked it with a slight adjustment, then lowered her hands to the weapon parts. She began to reassemble. Her fingers moved with absolute certainty in the darkness. Each piece found its place without fumbling, without error, without the slightest pause. The bolt was first, then the cam pin, firing pin, bolt carrier, the charging handle seated, upper and lower receivers joined, takedown pins engaged. The digital clock on the far wall tracked the seconds. 45, 46, 47. Sarah removed the blindfold and placed the completed M4 on the cart. The training center's qualification record, held by a Green Beret instructor from a special warfare school, was 52 seconds. Sarah Chen, range maintenance staff, had just beaten it by 5 seconds, while blindfold. The silence that followed stretched past awkwardness into something almost otherworldly. Santos' clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering on the concrete floor. Rodriguez's mouth hung slightly open. Even Papa Williams had stopped pretending to examine the memorial photograph. The tactical smartwatch on Specialist Torres's wrist reflected the overhead lights as he raised his arm to check the time, a nervous habit, seeking something normal to ground him in a moment that had suddenly become extraordinary. Torres wasn't thinking about technology. He was staring at the woman who had tried to help him, seeing her for the first time as something more than just invisible. That's... Bradley's voice emerged, rough and uncertain. That's not possible. Lucky, Hawkins insisted, but the word lacked conviction. She got luck. Practiced this exact model. Doesn't mean anything. 47 seconds blindfolded doesn't mean anything. With respect, Captain. Rodriguez's skepticism edged towards openly disagreeing with a superior officer. That's not luck. That's muscle memory. Muscle memory from playing paintball on weekends? Walsh had completely lowered her phone now. Her recording forgotten. She's a cleaning lady. She probably can't even legally own a firearm. Sarah began gathering the M4 components to return them to Santo. Her movements remained unhurried, unaffected by the attention suddenly focused on her with new intensity. "May I return this to the armory now?" she asked, her voice still holding that soft, almost apologetic tone. "No." Bradley stepped forward, a different light in his eye. It was the competitive spark of an instructor, whose professional pride had been unexpectedly challenged. "No, you may not." He turned towards the weapons vault. "Santos, get me another M4, one of the ones from the maintenance shelf, the ones that haven't passed inspection yet." The armorer hesitated. "Sir, those weapons have documented problems. They're not cleared for use. I'm not going to have her fire it. I just want to observe something." Santos retrieved a second M4. This one bore the orange tags marking it as temporarily out of service. She handed it to Bradley, who turned and thrust it toward Sarah. "Tell me what's wrong with this weapon, without taking it apart, without checking the maintenance log, just by handling it." Sarah accepted the rifle with the same instinctive grip she'd shown before. She turned it over once, then twice, her fingers tracing along the receiver. She worked the charging handle, listening to its mechanical sound. She checked the trigger pull, felt the resistance of the action. 2 seconds of contact, perhaps 3. The firing pin shows unusual wear. You'll see deformation at the tip, affecting how it strikes the primer. The extractor spring is weakening, which will cause failures to eject under sustained fire. Based on the sound of the action, you're also seeing early signs of buffer spring fatigue. She paused, then added, "I would replace the firing pin and extractor spring immediately. The buffer spring can probably last another 500 rounds if you're not doing rapid fire exercises." Santos's face went pale. That's exactly what's in the maintenance report, word for word." "How did you?" "Lucky guess," Walsh interrupted, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. She probably saw the repair orders somewhere, read them while cleaning. "I don't display repair orders in public areas," Santos replied flatly. "Those documents are secured in my office." The atmosphere in the training center had shifted profoundly. What started as casual mockery of an overly confident cleaning lady had become something else entirely. A mystery demanding an explanation. How did a civilian maintenance worker possess the skills of an elite weapons specialist? Rodriguez voiced what many others were thinking. "Where did you serve?" Sarah had already turned back to her cart. "I'm sorry. Your service record. What branch? What unit?" The sergeant first class stepped closer. Her earlier caution forgot. "Nobody handles weapons like that without military training." "Advanced military training. I'm just maintenance staff." The familiar refusal, delivered in the same soft voice. "That's nonsense." Bradley's patience had vanished. Nobody field strips an M4 blindfolded in under 50 seconds without combat-level training. Nobody diagnoses weapon malfunctions by touch without years of advanced gunsmithing experience. "Who are you really?" The question echoed through the suddenly silent hall. Hawkins exchanged glances with Walsh, a silent message passing between them. Their initial amusement had curdled into something far more complex, suspicion mixed with the unsettling realization that they might have grievously misjudged their target. "I'm just going to make a quick call," Walsh said, her phone already rising to her ear. "Personnel records. See what we can find out about Miss Chen here." Sarah's expression didn't change, but for a single instant, her eyes flickered toward the far corner of the room, toward the memorial wall with its photographs of fallen soldiers, its flags, unit patches, and dog tags displayed behind glass. Papa Williams caught the glance. A chill ran down his spine. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of men and women who had endured more loss than civilians could imagine, in the faces of warriors who carried silent burdens. The old sergeant major began to make his way across the hall, his interest no longer casual. Walsh's call connected within seconds.
The authority of her rank opened doors that enlisted personnel had to wait patiently for. Personnel records. This is Captain Walsh. I need an employee file. Chen. Sarah. Maintenance staff at the Tactical Training Center. She paused, listened, then nodded. That's right. Hired how long ago? 6 months. And the background check showed. I see nothing. No military service at all. She lowered the phone with a satisfied smirk. Mystery solved. Sarah Chen, hired 6 months ago. No military record anywhere in the system. Never served a day in uniform. Civilian contractor maybe. Peters suggested. Some of those private security types have serious skills. Blackwater, or whatever they call themselves now. Maybe they trained her. Hawkins seized on the explanation with visible relief. Makes sense. She picked up some tricks from hired guns. Doesn't make her one of us. Except private contractors are in the database too. Santos pointed out quietly. All of them. It's a federal requirement.
So, she's just a talented civilian. Bradley shrugged, but his eyes kept returning to Sarah with an expression that suggested he didn't quite believe his own dismissal. Some people are naturals. Sarah had resumed pushing her maintenance cart toward the far wall, trying to slip away from the spotlight. But the crowd's attention clung to her like heat-seeking missiles tracking an exhaust trail. Hold on. Hawkins moved to block her path again. We're not done here. I have work to do, Captain. Your work can wait. We still haven't resolved the original issue. He stepped closer, intentionally intimidating. You embarrassed yourself, and you embarrassed Specialist Torres with your little intervention. Now you've shown us some tricks. Impressive tricks, I'll admit, but tricks don't prove anything. What would prove something? Rodriguez asked, her voice carefully neutral, though her curiosity was clear. Hawkins smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Coin check. The words sent a ripple through the watching soldier. Challenge coins. A military tradition said to date back to World War I, when an American pilot reportedly used his unit medallion to prove his identity and save his life. The custom had grown over decades. Units created coins to build team spirit. Leaders awarded them to acknowledge achievement. Warriors collected them as tangible proof of service, sacrifice, and belonging. Being challenged for a coin was both an honor and a test. If you could produce a valid military challenge coin, the challenger owed you a drink. If you couldn't, you owed them one. But more importantly, failing to produce a coin meant admitting you had no right to claim military credentials. It was a test of acceptance administered by those who guarded the gates. Show us your coin, Hawkins demanded. Prove you have any actual connection to the military beyond scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. Sarah stopped walking. For the first time since the confrontation began, something other than calm acceptance flickered across her features. A brief tightening around her eyes, a slight tensing of her shoulders under the shapeless jumpsuit. Her right hand moved almost unconsciously toward her pocket, then stopped. I don't think that's appropriate, she said quietly. Translation. She doesn't have one. Peters laughed. Fake exposed. She learned some online tricks and thought she could play soldier. Everyone in this room who has served, raise your coins. Hawkins pulled a bronze medallion from his pocket. The 75th Ranger Regiment's scroll was prominent on one side, its motto on the other. Around him others followed suit. Bradley produced a weapons instructor certification coin. Walsh displayed her CIA military liaison insignia. Peters held up his West Point graduation medallion. Dozens of coins caught the light, a shimmering sea of metal representing careers, deployments, sacrifices, and honors. Your turn, Chen. Hawkins gestured broadly. Show us what you've got, or admit you're nobody. The challenge hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Colonel James Morrison chose that exact moment to emerge from the shadows near the administrative offices. He had been watching for several minutes, ever since the blindfolded disassembly had captured everyone's attention. At 52 years old, Morrison carried the distinct presence of a career officer who had survived multiple deployments, political battles, and the slow erosion of ideals that command inevitably brought. The eagles on his collar represented 3 decades of service. The combat infantryman badge above his breast pocket spoke of direct clashes with enemy forces, but it was his eyes that marked him as more than a typical senior officer. They held the peculiar stillness of someone who had witnessed things that couldn't be unseen, who had survived experiences that couldn't be explained to those who hadn't shared them. Those eyes were now fixed on Sarah Chen with an intensity that made several nearby soldiers unconsciously take a step back. What exactly is happening here? His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who rarely needed to raise. Hawkins snapped to attention, the automatic response of a junior to a superior. Sir, we were just conducting an informal credentials check with maintenance staff who claimed expertise in weapons handling. I claimed nothing, Sarah said softly. You touched a soldier's weapon and presumed to correct his form, Walsh interjected, her phone now in her pocket but her aggressive stance maintained. That's claiming something. Morrison's gaze swept across the assembled crowd, 32 people, most watching with the eager attention of spectators at a brutal sport. His expression revealed nothing, but displeasure emanated from him in waves that any military veteran could sense. Miss Chen, he addressed Sarah directly. Care to explain what transpired here? She met his eyes for the first time. Something passed between them, a flicker of mutual assessment. Two people sizing each other up in the space between heartbeats. I noticed Specialist Torres holding his rifle in a way that could cause problems during sustained fire, Colonel. I suggested a correction. It was inappropriate of me to get involved. I apologize. She field-stripped an M4 blindfolded in 47 seconds. Santos blurted out, and diagnosed weapon malfunctions by touch. Morrison's eyebrow rose fractionally. Is that so? Sir, with all due respect, there's clearly something unusual about this woman. Bradley stepped forward, emboldened by the presence of higher authority. Her skills don't match her job. Her background check shows no military service. She refuses to participate in a proper coin check. Someone with these capabilities, hidden in a maintenance position, raises concerns. What kind of concerns? Security concerns. For all we know, she could be foreign intelligence, industrial espionage, someone gathering information about our training methods and weapon specifications. The accusation exploded like a grenade in the silent hall. Several soldiers exchanged alarmed glances. Walsh's hand drifted toward her phone again, no doubt calculating the career implications of breaking a spy story. Sarah remained motionless, her expression unchanged, but under her cap, her eyes had turned cold. It was the flat, calculating gaze of someone reassessing threat levels and response options. That's quite an accusation, Major. Morrison's voice remained even, but a sharp edge had crept into it that made Bradley take a half step backward. Do you have any evidence beyond speculation? Her skills speak for themselves, sir. Those aren't civilian abilities. So your theory is that a foreign intelligence service recruited an operative with elite special forces training, then embedded her as a maintenance worker at a domestic training facility rather than, say, positioning her somewhere with access to actual classified material. Bradley flushed. I'm just saying it's suspicious. What's suspicious is 4 officers ganging up on a civilian employee in my facility. Morrison's voice hardened. What I've witnessed looks remarkably like harassment and intimidation. Conduct unbecoming. Hawkins stepped forward. Sir, if I'm... You may not. The colonel's interruption cut like a blade. However, he turned back to Sarah, his expression unreadable. The skills you've demonstrated do raise legitimate questions. If you have nothing to hide, a simple demonstration should resolve this matter. Would you be willing to run a qualification course? Sarah's hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds. I'm just maintenance staff, Colonel. That's not my place. I'm making it your place. Morrison's eyes held hers, and something in his gaze suggested the request was more than simple curiosity. Consider it a direct order to a contractor operating under my authority. The hall held its breath. Sarah Chen looked at the colonel, at his eagles and his combat infantryman badge, and his eyes full of questions he hadn't yet voiced. She looked at the officers who had mocked her, the soldiers who had watched, the armorer whose weapons she had analyzed with impossible precision. Yes, sir, she said finally. The words seemed to unlock something. Santos immediately began preparing the qualification range. Rodriguez volunteered to serve as safety officer. Bradley, his accusations temporarily forgotten, took up position as official scorer. The crowd moved toward the shooting complex, 32 witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, curiosity, and the peculiar tension of a military community suddenly faced with an anomaly in their midst.
The qualification course was standard, 50 rounds at various distances, timed and scored for accuracy. Anyone who had worn a uniform recognized its demands. Pass rates for active duty personnel hovered around 8. Achieving excellence meant hitting 48 or more shots in the target zones. Santos handed Sarah an M4 from the ready rack, properly inspected, magazine loaded, and ready for use. The maintenance worker accepted it with the same instinctive grip she had demonstrated earlier, automatically checked the chamber, and moved to the first firing position. Standard qualification protocol, Rodriguez announced from her spot as safety officer. 5 stages, 10 rounds each. Time limit is 30 minutes total. Scoring begins on the first trigger pull. Sarah nodded once and raised the weapon to her shoulder. What followed would become a range legend for years to come. She fired her first 10 rounds in 23 seconds. All 10 struck dead center of the target at 15 meters. She transitioned to the 25-meter position without hesitation, her movement between stations fluid and economical in a way that spoke of thousands of repetitions. Another 10 rounds, another 20 seconds, another perfect cluster of holes punched through the target's vital zones, 50 meters, 75, 100. Each stage completed with the same mechanical precision, the same unnerving consistency, the same absence of wasted motion or unnecessary delay. Bradley's scoring tablet showed 0 misses. Not a single round outside the designated kill zones. A perfect score. Total time 8 minutes, 14 seconds. The range record for the standard qualification course was 9 minutes, 41 seconds. Sarah had just beaten it by nearly 90 seconds while maintaining flawless accuracy. Run the advanced course. Morrison's voice cut through the stunned silence. His eyes hadn't left Sarah since she picked up the weapon. The advanced tactical course was designed to mimic combat conditions, moving targets, varied lighting, shoot-don't-shoot scenarios involving civilian cutouts mixed with enemy silhouettes. Pass rates for infantry soldiers typically dropped to 6. Special Forces qualification required. Sarah moved through it like a wraith. Her transitions from cover to cover showed a fluidity that only came from actual combat experience. She identified threats before targets fully appeared, leading each shot with an anticipation that suggested she knew where enemies would emerge before they materialized. Her engagement of moving targets displayed a predictive ability that could be taught in manuals, but only real combat truly honed. 11 seconds faster than the range record. 0 civilian casualties. 100% hostile neutralization. When she finally lowered her weapon and stepped back from the final position, the silence in the observation area had transformed from surprise to something approaching awe. Holy! Peters caught himself, his professional composure barely intact. That's not possible, Walsh whispered. That's physically not possible for a civilian, but it was Major Bradley who voiced what everyone was thinking. She doesn't move like someone who is trained. She moves like someone who has killed. The words hung in the air, heavy with unsettling meaning. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that had shifted from mere curiosity to something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Miss Chen? Practice, sir. The familiar evasion. That's not practice. That's combat conditioning. That's muscle memory from repetitive stress under fire. He moved closer, studying her face as if searching for something he expected to find. I've seen hundreds of shooters come through this facility. The best ones, the ones who actually engage with enemies, move differently than people who only train. You move like you've been in the fight. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. A barrier rising, defenses strengthening. Papa Williams had pushed his way to the front of the crowd. The retired sergeant major's weathered face was pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Colonel, I'd like permission to speak. Morrison nodded without looking away from Sarah. I've seen movement like that exactly 3 times in 73 years. Once in Vietnam with the SOG teams, once in Desert Storm with Delta, and once, his voice caught, once in a classified briefing about Operation Ghost Viper. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Several veterans in the crowd stiffened. Ghost Viper wasn't something discussed openly. The operation remained classified at levels most soldiers would never encounter. but rumors had circulated for years. Whispers of an extraction mission in Afghanistan. 23 prisoners of war freed from a Taliban stronghold against impossible odds. That's enough, Sergeant Major. Morrison's voice carried a warning. With respect, sir, I don't think it is. The old man's eyes hadn't left Sarah. I was part of the intelligence debrief team. I saw the satellite imagery. I saw the body count. One operator working alone after her team was compromised, eliminated 17 hostiles and extracted 24 prisoners through 3 kilometers of enemy territory while wounded. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They called her Ghost. Sarah Chen stood motionless in the center of the firing range, surrounded by the undeniable proof of her impossible skills. Her face betrayed nothing, but Hawkins had noticed something. His aggressive posture had begun to crumble, as the implications took shape in his mind, though his pride refused to accept them without undeniable evidence. "This is ridiculous," he declared, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "Some old stories about classified operations don't prove anything. She's probably just a talented civilian who watches too many military documentaries. I want hard evidence. I want—" He stepped forward and grabbed Sarah's shoulder. What happened next would be debated for years by everyone who witnessed it. Sarah didn't attack. She didn't strike or kick or use any visible technique. She simply redirected. A subtle shift of weight, a turn of her shoulder, a step that placed her exactly where Hawkins's momentum wanted to carry him, leaving him grasping at empty air. He stumbled, recovered, then grabbed again, angrier now. This time she allowed him to make contact. She let him grip her jumpsuit collar. She let him pull. The fabric tore. The shoulder of her jumpsuit ripped open, exposing the skin beneath and the tattoo that marked it. The tattoo covered her upper shoulder and extended toward her collarbone. It wasn't a standard military design, but something more personal, more significant. A triangular insignia that only those with the highest security clearances would recognize. The Delta Force operational identifier. Below it, in stark black letters that had faded slightly with time, but remained unmistakably clear, Ghost Viper. And beneath that date, a smaller marking that made Santos actually cry out in shock. The Medal of Honor wreath symbol, tattooed over the wearer's heart in the tradition of recipients who wished to carry their honor invisibly. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Papa Williams's voice cracked with emotion. "Oh my God, Ghost Viper. That's Operation Ghost Viper. She's the ghost." Morrison's face had gone stark white. His hands trembled at his side. His eyes, fixed on the tattoo and the woman who bore it, held the expression of a man confronting a phantom from his past. "It's not possible," he whispered. "You died. The after-action report said you died." Sarah met his gaze for the first time without deflection. "Reports can be wrong, Captain Morrison." The use of his former rank, the rank he had held 14 years ago during an operation that remained classified at the highest levels of national security, struck Morrison like a physical blow. "It's Colonel now," he managed. "I know. I've been watching you for 6 months." A faint smile crossed her features. "You've done well. The men you lost would be proud." Morrison's composure finally broke. His hand rose to his face, pressing against his eyes as if trying to block out a vision too overwhelming to process. When he lowered it, tears streamed down his cheeks. "You saved my life," he said. "You saved all of us. 23 prisoners, 3 years of captivity, and you came out of nowhere like a ghost." Sarah's voice was soft. That was the point. Around them the witnesses stood frozen. Walsh's phone hung forgotten at her side. Bradley had pressed himself against the wall as if trying to become invisible. Hawkins remained rooted, his hands still clutching the torn fabric of Sarah's jumpsuit, his face a mask of dawning horror as he fully grasped what he had done. "The Medal of Honor," Santos whispered. "You're a Medal of Honor recipient. You're the ghost." Sarah reached into the pocket she had touched earlier, the gesture that had caught observers' attention before, and withdrew a small object. It caught the overhead lights as she turned it over in her palm, revealing its details to the watching crowd. Not a standard challenge coin, not a unit medallion or deployment marker. It was a presidential unit citation, personal issue, presented by the commander-in-chief to recipients of the nation's highest military honor. Only 3 had ever been minted. 1 rested in the Smithsonian. 1 lay buried with its recipient in Arlington National Cemetery. The 3rd gleamed in the palm of Sarah Chen's hand. "Colonel James Morrison, commander of Fort Liberty Tactical Training Center, snapped to attention. His heels clicked together, his spine straight, his hand rose in a perfect salute, rendered with the precision that 3 decades of service had instilled. Master Sergeant Chen, he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Medal of Honor recipient, Operation Ghost Viper. Around the range, every soldier who had witnessed the confrontation followed his lead. Rodriguez snapped to attention. Santos saluted through her tears. Papa Williams drew himself up with the pride of a man seeing legend made real. Even the antagonists, Bradley, Walsh, Peters, found their bodies responding to training and tradition, rendering honors to someone whose sacrifice they had mocked mere moments before. Only Hawkins remained motionless. The captain's face had gone gray. His hands still gripped the torn fabric of Sarah's uniform, the physical evidence of his assault on a national hero. "Oh no," he breathed. "Oh no, no." Sarah looked at him with eyes that held no anger, only a deep, weary patience. "You can let go now, Captain," she said quietly. "The demonstration is over." Hawkins's fingers uncurled from the torn fabric as if it had suddenly caught fire. The piece of gray jumpsuit drifted to the concrete floor, landing silently in the profound hush that had consumed the training center. His legs gave way. The captain, who had swaggered through this facility with the confidence of a man certain of his place in the hierarchy, found himself sinking to his knees. Not from any external force, no one had touched him. His own body simply refused to support the weight of what he had done. "Medal of Honor," he whispered, the words emerging broken and disbelieving. "I just assaulted a Medal of Honor recipient." Sarah Chen looked down at him with an expression that defied easy interpretation. Not anger, though it would have been justified. Not satisfaction, though lesser people might have savored this moment. Something closer to weariness. The exhaustion of someone who had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by its failures. "You didn't know," she said simply. "That doesn't matter." Morrison's voice cut through the silence, sharp with authority and something raw beneath it. "That doesn't matter at all, Captain Hawkins. You assaulted a civilian employee in my facility, you participated in organized harassment, you physically grabbed a woman half your size, because she dared to know more than you about weapons handling." His voice rose with each accusation. "The fact that she happens to be one of the most decorated soldiers in American history doesn't excuse your behavior, it just makes it worse." Walsh had pressed herself against the wall near the exit, her phone clutched to her chest like a protective charm. The video she had been so eager to capture, the humiliation of a cleaning lady who didn't know her place, now represented something very different, evident documentation of conduct that could end careers. "Sir," she started, "I didn't." "You recorded it." Rodriguez's voice carried the particular coldness of someone who had lost all respect for a fellow soldier. "You recorded the whole thing. You were going to post it online, share it with your friends, laugh about the immigrant cleaning lady who thought she knew about guns. I didn't know who she was."
Would it have mattered? Papa Williams stepped forward, his aged frame somehow commanding despite his civilian clothes. If she had been just a cleaning lady, just some woman doing honest work to feed her family, would that have made your behavior acceptable? Walsh had no answer. Bradley stood apart from the others, his weapons instructor credentials suddenly feeling very small against the evidence of true expertise he had witnessed. 20 years of teaching soldiers to shoot, and he had just watched a woman half his size demonstrate skills that made his own look ordinary. "The diagnostic," he said slowly, almost to himself. "The weapon diagnostic. You pinpointed problems I missed in my own inspection. Firing pin wear, extractor spring fatigue. I checked that rifle yesterday and cleared it for range use. You cleared a weapon that needed immediate maintenance." Sarah's voice remained level, without accusation. "The next soldier who used it would have experienced a failure to eject within the first 50 rounds. In a training environment, that's an annoyance. In combat, it's a death sentence." Bradley's face cycled through several shades of gray before settling on something approaching shame. "I've been doing this for 20 years, and you've gotten comfortable, complacent." Still no judgment in her tone, just observation. "It happens to everyone eventually. The routines become automatic. The details start to blur. You stop seeing what's in front of you because you're so certain you already know what's there." The words landed with surgical precision, cutting through Bradley's professional pride to the truth beneath. He had become what he had always despised in others, a soldier who went through the motions without truly engaging. Lieutenant Peters had retreated to the far corner of the observation area, trying to make himself invisible. The youngest of the antagonists, he had followed the others' lead without questioning, eager to belong, desperate to prove himself part of the group. Now he understood the cost of that belonging. "I didn't even say anything original," he muttered, the realization dawning with horrible clarity. "Everything I said, the online jokes, the fake comments, I was just repeating what they said. I didn't think for myself at all." Specialist Torres approached him quietly. The young soldier whose grip Sarah had corrected, the incident that started this entire confrontation, stood before his fellow junior officer with an expression of profound disappointment. "She was trying to help me, Torres. That's all she was doing, trying to help, and you turned it into this." Peters couldn't meet his eyes. Colonel Morrison had not broken his salute. The gesture, held far longer than protocol required, had transformed from military courtesy into something more profound, an acknowledgement not just of rank or achievement, but of a personal, unpayable debt. "You can stand down, Colonel." Sarah's voice carried a hint of what might have been affection. "Your arm must be getting tired." Morrison lowered his hand slowly, as if reluctant to release the connection the salute represented. "I looked for you," he said. "After the extraction, after we got back stateside, I tried to find out what happened to you, but everything was classified. They told me you died during the withdrawal, that you held the rear guard position until the helicopter extracted us, and then," his voice broke, "they said you didn't make it. That was the official story. Easier for everyone if Ghost stayed dead." "Easier for who?" Sarah's smile held no warmth. "For the people who sent us into that compound without adequate intelligence, for the commanders who ignored the warning signs that the mission was compromised, for the politicians who needed a clean narrative about prisoner rescue without uncomfortable questions about how those prisoners ended up in enemy hands in the first place." The implications of her words rippled through the listening crowd. This wasn't just a story of heroism. It was a story of institutional failure, covered up and classified, buried under medals and commendations. "They gave you the Medal of Honor," Santos said slowly, working through the logic. "But they also faked your death. That doesn't make sense." The medal was awarded posthumously. Master Sergeant Sarah Chen, killed in action during Operation Ghost Viper, August 12. "There's a grave in Arlington, with my name on it. Empty casket, full military honors, flag presented to her mother." Sarah's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. "Old pain, never fully healed. The real me got a new identity, a medical discharge, and a suggestion that I disappear somewhere quiet." "Why?" Rodriguez asked. "Why would they want a hero to disappear?" "Because heroes ask questions. Heroes have credibility. Heroes can stand in front of cameras and tell the truth about what happened, and people listen." Sarah turned toward the memorial wall, her eyes finding photographs of soldiers she might have known. The truth about Ghost Viper would have embarrassed very powerful people. The intelligence failures, the command decisions, the reason those 23 Americans ended up in that compound in the first place. None of it could survive public scrutiny. "So they silenced you," Papa Williams's voice was heavy with understanding. "Gave you a medal and a grave, and made you vanish. They gave me a choice: disappear voluntarily with an honorable discharge and full benefits, or face a court-martial for actions taken during the extraction that violated standing orders." Sarah's shoulders rose and fell in a slight shrug. "I chose to disappear. It seemed easier than fighting." "What action?" Morrison asked. "What could you possibly have done during that mission that warranted a court-martial?" "I disobeyed direct orders to abort when the mission was compromised. I engaged enemy combatants after being instructed to withdraw. I appropriated equipment and ammunition from fallen team members without authorization." A ghost of her earlier smile returned. "And I refused to leave any of you behind, even when command explicitly ordered me to prioritize my own extraction." The silence that followed was different from before. Not shock or surprise, but something closer to reverence. She had disobeyed orders to save lives. She had risked everything: her career, her freedom, her future. because leaving fellow soldiers behind was simply not something she was capable of doing. That's why I'm here, she continued quietly. Why I took this job at this facility 6 months ago. I wanted to be close to something familiar. The ranges, the weapons, the routine of military life. It reminds me of who I used to be, and I wanted to see you, Jane, to see what kind of man you became after Ghost Viper. Morrison's composure finally cracked completely. The tears he had been fighting spilled freely down his cheeks. You've been watching me for 6 months. You've been here in my facility and you never said anything. What would I have said? Hello? I'm the ghost who was supposed to stay dead. You had moved on, built a career, made something of yourself. I didn't want to disrupt that. You saved my life. The words came out raw, stripped of military formality. You saved all of us. 3 years I spent in that compound, Sarah. 3 years of thinking I would die there. And then you came out of nowhere. One woman against an army and you brought us home. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I have spent 14 years trying to live a life worthy of that sacrifice. Every decision I've made, every soldier I've trained, every moment I've tried to do good in this uniform. It's all been because you gave me a second chance. And you've been here watching, thinking I didn't care enough to look for you. I didn't think. You didn't. For the first time, something like anger entered Morrison's voice. You saved 23 people, and then disappeared because you didn't think anyone would want to find you. Sarah, I have searched for you every year on the anniversary. I have written letters to classification authorities begging for information. I have, his voice cracked. I named my daughter after you. My wife. She knows the story. She knows what you did. When our little girl was born, there was never any question what her name would be. Sarah Chen, the ghost of Ghost Viper. The woman who had killed 17 enemy combatants to save 23 American prisoners, stood perfectly still as tears finally broke through her carefully maintained composure. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I had to do something. You gave me back my life. The least I could do was make sure your name meant something to someone. The training center had been transformed. What began as a Saturday morning qualification session had become something entirely different. A reckoning. A revelation, and for some the beginning of a painful process of self-examination. Colonel Morrison wiped his eyes and straightened his uniform, reassuming the mantle of command that the moment's emotion had briefly stripped away. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his authority. Captain Hawkins, Captain Walsh, Major Bradley, Lieutenant Peters, each name fell like a hammer blow. Attention! The 4 officers snapped to rigid posture, their faces masks of barely controlled terror. They knew what was coming. They had seen careers ended for far less than what they had done today. In the presence of these witnesses, I am placing formal reprimands in each of your files. These reprimands will detail your conduct today. The harassment, the intimidation, the physical assault of a civilian employee. Morrison's voice could have cut steel. You will each submit written apologies to Master Sergeant Chen within 48 hours. Not the kind of apologies that explain why your behavior was actually justified. Real apologies, acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to change. Yes, sir, came the ragged chorus. Additionally, you will all complete mandatory sensitivity and leadership training, not the online checkbox variety. In-person instruction, evaluated by professionals who will determine whether you are fit to lead soldiers. Morrison paused, letting the weight of his words settle, because what I witnessed today was not leadership. It was bullying. It was abuse of. It was the precise opposite of everything this uniform is supposed to represent. Hawkins found his voice, though it emerged barely above a whisper. Sir, permission to speak. Denied. Please, sir. I need to. The captain's composure shattered. I need her to know how sorry I am. I need her to understand that I didn't. He turned toward Sarah, dropping to both knees now, his hands clasped in a gesture that would have seemed theatrical if the anguish on his face weren't so obviously genuine. Ma'am, Master Sergeant, I am so sorry. I have never in my life been more ashamed of my own behavior. I looked at you and saw someone small, someone quiet, someone I could push around to make myself feel powerful. I didn't see a soldier. I didn't see a hero. I didn't see a person. Tears streamed down his face. I saw a target. And that says everything about who I am.
and nothing about who you are. Sarah looked at the broken man kneeling before her, the officer who, 30 minutes ago, had seemed like the embodiment of military arrogance. What she saw now was something more complex, a person confronting the ugliest parts of himself, stripped of the defenses that had allowed him to avoid that confrontation for years. "Get up, Captain. I don't deserve to," I said. "Get up." Her voice carried command authority that years of civilian life had not erased. Hawkins rose shakily to his feet. "You did a terrible thing today. You were cruel and petty, and everything wrong with how people in power sometimes treat those they consider beneath them. That's true. It's also true that you're the first person in this room to actually apologize. Not explain, not justify. Apologize." "I'm sorry," he repeated, the words barely audible. "I know." Sarah's expression softened fractionally. "Redemption doesn't begin with a single apology. It begins with the recognition that you need to change. You've taken that step. What you do next determines whether it means anything." Hawkins nodded, unable to speak. Walsh stepped forward, her earlier hostility replaced by something more vulnerable. "I need to apologize to the video I made. I deleted it, all of it. But I know that doesn't undo what I was planning to do with it. I was going to humiliate you online. I was going to make you a joke for people to laugh at." Her voice trembled. "I didn't see you as human. I saw you as content, something to exploit for attention and entertainment. The modern disease," Sarah said quietly, "turning people into products, experiences into engagement metrics. I won't do it again. I swear I won't." "Don't swear to me. Swear to yourself." "I'm not the one who has to live with your choices." Bradley and Peters offered their own apologies, less eloquent than Hawkins's, more formal than Walsh's, but seemingly genuine in their remorse. Sarah accepted each with the same measured grace, neither absolving nor condemning, simply acknowledging. Colonel Morrison thought about the online leadership courses he had recommended to junior officers over the years. These 4 officers needed more than online courses. They needed a fundamental reconstruction of their understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. But that was a problem for another day. "Master Sergeant Chen," Morrison said formally, drawing himself to attention once more. "On behalf of this command and everyone who has witnessed your treatment today, I offer my deepest apologies. This facility failed in its fundamental duty to treat every person within its walls with dignity and respect. You didn't fail, Colonel. You weren't even present when it started. This is my command. Everything that happens here is my responsibility." He paused, then continued in a different tone, less formal, more personal. "I also want to offer you something else. This facility could use someone with your skill. We have an opening for senior range instructor, full military contractor status, benefits package, the works. You would be training the next generation of soldiers, passing on everything you know." His eyes held hers. "You wouldn't have to be invisible anymore." The offer hung in the air between them. Sarah's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, consideration, something that might have been longing. For 6 months, she had existed in the shadows of this facility, watching soldiers train, observing instructors teach, remembering what it felt like to belong to something larger than herself. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "It's a generous offer. I need time to consider what that would mean." "Take all the time you need. The position will be waiting whenever you're ready." Papa Williams shuffled forward, his aged hands reaching for one of Sarah's. "Young lady, I have been collecting stories from warriors my entire life. Vietnam, Desert Storm, the War on Terror. I've met heroes from every conflict. But what you did at Ghost Viper," he shook his head slowly. "I read the sanitized version in a classified briefing 20 years ago, and it gave me nightmares. To learn that you've survived, that you've been living among us, serving this community in your own quiet way." His voice broke. "It restores my faith in everything I spent my life fighting for." Similar sentiments emerged from around the room. Rodriguez approached to offer her personal thanks. Her brother, she revealed, had served in Afghanistan, and she understood something of what desert combat demanded. Santos, still wiping tears, asked permission to shake Sarah's hand. Torres, the young specialist whose grip correction had started everything, stood at attention and delivered a salute that would have passed muster at any formal inspection. But it was what happened next that would become legend at Fort Liberty for years to come. One by one, soldiers began stepping forward to place their challenge coins at Sarah's feet. Rodriguez went first, setting down her first sergeant coin from her previous assignment. Santos followed with her armorer certification medallion. Papa Williams added a Vietnam-era special operations coin that he had carried for 50 years. Torres contributed his basic training graduation marker, humble, but offered with the same sincerity as the others. The pile grew. Instructors and students, officers and enlisted, active duty and retired. Each person in that hall who possessed a coin came forward to offer it. Some explained what their coins represented. Others simply placed them in silence. All recognized the significance of the gesture. Challenge coins represented belonging, connection, the tangible proof that you had served something greater than yourself. By surrendering their coins to Sarah, these soldiers were saying something that words could not adequately express. You are one of us. You have always been one of us. We see you now. By the time the last coin joined the collection, over 30 medallions lay arranged in a gleaming pile before the woman who had spent 6 months trying to be invisible. Sarah stood at the center of it all, surrounded by evidence that her years of isolation had ended. For the first time since the revelation, perhaps for the first time in 14 years, she allowed herself to feel something other than the careful emptiness she had cultivated. She wept, not the quiet tears that had escaped earlier, but genuine, racking sobs that shook her small frame. It was the grief of years spent hiding, the loneliness of watching from the shadows, the weight of carrying her story alone, believing no one would understand, believing she had been forgotten by the country she served. Morrison stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It was the embrace of a man who owed his life to the woman he held, finally able to offer comfort to someone who had spent far too long denying herself the need for it. You're not alone anymore, he said softly. Whatever you decide about the instructor position, whatever you choose to do with your life going forward, you have family here. You will always have family here. The words seemed to reach something deep within Sarah. Her sobs gradually subsided. When she finally stepped back from Morrison's embrace, her eyes were red and swollen, but something in her expression had changed. Lighter somehow, as if a burden she had carried for years had finally found a resting place. I don't know what to say, she managed. You don't have to say anything, Morrison smiled, the genuine expression of a man whose debt had finally been acknowledged by its creditor. You said everything that needed saying 14 years ago, when you came through that compound door and told us we were going home. Around them, the training center began slowly returning to its normal rhythms. Soldiers who had witnessed the confrontation exchanged quiet conversations, processing what they had seen. The qualification schedule, thoroughly disrupted, would need to be reorganized. The administrative paperwork generated by the morning's events would keep someone busy for weeks, but nobody seemed particularly concerned about schedules or paperwork. Something more important had happened here today, something that transcended routine and protocol. Hawkins approached Sarah one final time. His earlier arrogance was entirely absent. Ma'am, if there's ever anything I can do, anything at all to make this right, please tell me. I meant what I said about wanting to learn from you. Not just weapon skills, everything. How to be the kind of soldier who deserves to wear this uniform. Sarah studied him for a long moment, seeing past the surface to the potential beneath. He had been cruel, yes, arrogant and petty, everything wrong with unchecked privilege, but he had also shown genuine remorse, not the performance of regret designed to minimize consequences, but actual acknowledgement of failure. Redemption begins with humility, she said finally. You've taken the first step. Keep walking, Captain. The path is long, but it leads somewhere worth going. Hawkins nodded, his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. Thank you, ma'am, for the second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance. I got one 14 years ago. It's only fair to pass it forward. As the crowd began to disperse, Papa Williams remained behind, studying Sarah with the particular intensity of someone working through a puzzle. One thing doesn't add up for me, he said slowly. You could have gone anywhere after they made you disappear. Any city, any state, anywhere in the world. You chose to come here to this facility, to work a job that keeps you close to military life. He paused, but Morrison only transferred to this command 8 months ago. You couldn't have known he would be stationed here when you took this position. Sarah's expression flickered, something passing behind her eyes too quickly to identify. You're right, she said carefully. I didn't know James would be here. I came for other reasons. What reason? But before she could answer, if she had intended to answer at all, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The sound was jarring in the emotional aftermath of the morning's events, an intrusion of modern technology into a moment that had felt almost timeless. Sarah glanced at the screen. Her expression, which had finally begun to relax, immediately tightened. Blocked number. She silenced the call without answering, and slipped the phone back into her pocket, but her hand trembled slightly as she did so. Everything all right? Morrison asked, noticing the change. Fine. Just someone I don't want to talk to. Her phone buzzed again. Text message this time. Sarah's eyes dropped to the screen, and what little color remained in her face drained away. Sarah, Morrison's voice sharpened with concern. What is? She didn't answer. Her thumb moved across the screen, deleting the message, but not before her expression revealed that whatever she had read had shaken her profoundly. Just an old ghost, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. Nothing to worry about. But Morrison had spent 3 years learning to read the micro-expressions of his captors, and 14 more honing those skills in military leadership. He knew when someone was lying. He also knew when to let a lie stand. The instructor position, he said instead, giving her space to compose herself. Will you think about it seriously? This facility needs someone with your skills. The Army needs people who understand what it really means to serve. Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I'll think about it, James. I promise. I just need a little time. Take whatever you need. My door is always open. She nodded and began gathering her things. The maintenance cart she had abandoned during the confrontation, the tools of a job she might never return to. Around her, soldiers continued offering acknowledgments as she passed. Nods of respect, murmured words of thanks. The changed atmosphere of a community that had witnessed something transformative and been altered by the experience. At the door to the main hall, Sarah paused and looked back. The training center stretched before her, the ranges where she had demonstrated impossible skills, the memorial wall with its photographs of fallen heroes, the people who had finally seen her as she truly was. Real warriors don't need recognition, she said quietly to no one in particular. They just need purpose. Then she pushed through the door and disappeared into the morning light. Morrison watched her go, his expression troubled. Something about that phone call, the way her face had changed, the way she had deleted the message without sharing its contents, nagged at the edges of his awareness. He returned to his office, his mind churning through possibility. The morning's events had answered so many questions, but they had also raised new ones. Why had Sarah really come to this facility? What was she running from? What old ghost still pursued her after 14 years of hiding? His computer chirped with an incoming secure message. Pentagon routing codes. Classification markers he rarely saw outside of crisis situations. Morrison opened the email and felt the blood drain from his face. Subject: Ghost Viper file unsealed. Classification: top secret. Special access required. From redacted to Colonel James Morrison. Colonel Morrison, recent events have triggered the automatic unsealing of previously classified materials related to Operation Ghost Viper. As a surviving participant in the referenced operation, you are being notified that certain information previously held under national security restrictions is now accessible through secure channels. Additionally, you should be aware that Operation Phoenix has been activated. Personnel with knowledge of Ghost Viper participants may be contacted for information relevant to current operations. If you have any knowledge of the current location or status of individuals involved in Ghost Viper, you are requested to report this information through appropriate channels immediately. This message will be automatically purged from your system. Morrison read the message 3 times, his hands growing steadier with each pass as military training overrode emotional response. Phoenix. The name meant nothing to him, but the implication was clear. Someone, somewhere, had reopened the Ghost Viper file. Someone was looking for information about the operation, about its participants, about Sarah. He reached for his phone to call her, to warn her, to find out what she knew about Phoenix and why the mention of old ghosts had made her face go pale. But he stopped himself. Whatever Sarah Chen was involved in, She had survived situations that would have killed most soldiers. She had evaded detection for 14 years while the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world believed her dead. She was not someone who needed protection, but she might need an ally. Morrison saved the email to a secure personal archive, technically a violation of the automatic purge instruction, but some rules existed to be bent when lives hung in the balance. Then he closed his laptop and stared at the wall of his office, where a single photograph occupied a place of honor. 23 men and women, thin and haggard but alive, standing before the helicopter that had carried them to freedom. In the background, barely visible, a small figure in combat gear watched over them all, the ghost who had brought them home. Somewhere in that morning's mystery, a story was unfolding. Phoenix was rising, old secrets were clawing their way toward the light, and Sarah Chen, the woman who had been dead for 14 years, was at the center of it all. Morrison picked up his phone and dialed a secure number he had memorized years ago. "This is Colonel Morrison, Fort Liberty," he said when the line connected. "I need information on Operation Phoenix, and I need it now." Back in the training center's main hall, the pile of challenge coins still lay where they had been placed, a glittering memorial to the morning's revelation. Santos had begun photographing each one, documenting the unprecedented tribute for institutional records. But one coin sat apart from the others, a coin that Sarah had left behind when she departed, not the presidential unit citation, which remained safely in her pocket. Something else, a small bronze medallion worn smooth by years of handling. On one side, the Delta Force insignia, on the other a single word, Phoenix. Santos picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hand. The metal was warm, as if it had been held close to someone's body for a very long time. "Colonel Morrison," she called out, but the commander had already retreated to his office. She looked at the coin again, at the word that seemed to carry weight far beyond its simple letter. Phoenix, the bird that rose from ashes, the story that refused to end. Outside, Sarah Chen walked through the Fort Liberty parking lot, her pace unhurried, but her eyes constantly scanning. The morning sun warmed her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, 14 years in the past, in a compound in the mountains of Afghanistan, where a mission had gone wrong in ways that the official reports would never fully describe. Her phone buzzed again, another blocked call. This time she answered. "I know you found me," she said without preamble. "I've known for months. The question is, what do you want?" The voice on the other end was electronically distorted, but something in its cadence felt familiar. "We want what we've always wanted, Ghost," the voice said.
The truth about what? About what really happened during the extraction? About the intelligence that led to the compromise? About who inside our own government sold those prisoners to the Taliban in the first place? A pause. About why you really agreed to disappear. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of secrets she had carried for 14 years pressed against her chest like a physical burden. Phoenix was supposed to stay buried. Phoenix was supposed to find answers. The operation was suspended, not terminated. And now, after all these years, we finally have a lead. Someone is talking, Ghost. Someone who was there that night. Someone who knows what you know. Morrison doesn't know anything. Leave him out of this. We're not interested in Morrison. We're interested in you, in what you saw, in the evidence you collected before the extraction. The distorted voice hardened. In the files you were supposed to destroy but didn't. Sarah's hand tightened around the phone. Those files are my insurance policy. They're the only reason I'm still alive. We're not your enemies, Ghost. We never were. But the people who wanted you dead 14 years ago, they're still out there, still in positions of power, still covering their tracks. A final pause. Phoenix is offering you a choice. Help us finish what we started, and we'll make sure you never have to hide again. Refuse and, well, we can't guarantee anyone's safety. Not yours, not Morrison's, not anyone who was in that compound. The line went dead. Sarah stood alone in the parking lot, the morning sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. In the distance she could see the training center where everything had changed, where her carefully constructed anonymity had shattered, where ghosts from her past had finally caught up with her. She thought about Morrison's job offer, the chance to stop hiding, to belong to something again. She thought about the pile of challenge coins offered in tribute by soldiers who saw her as a hero rather than a fugitive. She thought about Phoenix rising from ashes that had never fully cooled. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from Morrison sent from his personal number rather than his military account. "Whatever's happening, you're not alone. Come back when you're ready. We'll face it together." Sarah read the message 3 times, then she deleted it just as she had deleted all the others. But this time, she didn't throw the phone away. Instead, she turned back toward the training center, where 32 challenge coins waited for someone to claim them, where a job offer remained open, where the first real family she had known in 14 years had assembled itself around her without warning or expectation. Phoenix wanted answers. The people who had buried her wanted her to stay dead. Morrison and his soldiers wanted her to stay. Sarah Chen, the ghost of Ghost Viper, stood at the crossroads of her own resurrection, weighing choices that would determine not just her future but the fates of everyone she had come to care about. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and somewhere in the distance a phoenix screamed as it rose from flames that had burned for far too long. "Real warriors don't need recognition," she had said. "They just need purpose." Perhaps it was time to find her. The parking lot looked ordinary in the way that military parking lots always did. White lines, faded numbers, the distant whine of an HVAC unit pushing cold air through ducts the size of coffins. The sun sat low enough to throw long shadows across the asphalt, dividing Sarah Chen into two silhouettes: the woman who had spent 6 months pushing a maintenance cart, and the ghost who had just walked back into the world. She stood with her phone still warm in her palm. The call had ended, but its echo hadn't faded. The voice, distorted, cautious, familiar in a way she couldn't quite place, had used the old word without hesitation. Ghost. Sarah slipped her phone into her pocket, then paused as if she'd forgotten how pockets work. For 14 years, reflex had been her religion. Move, scan, measure distance, note exits. Never let your back be the most interesting thing in the room, and yet she'd done exactly that inside. She'd turned her back on the crowd and let them watch her breathe. The training center doors were behind her, heavy and steel-framed, the kind that closed with a finality you felt in your teeth. Through the glass, she could see movement, blurry shapes, people gathering in the aftermath of the revelation. She didn't need to hear their voices to know the tone. It was the tone of a system recalibrating itself around something it hadn't predicted. She had been an anomaly. Now she was a problem. A problem always drew attention. Attention drew questions. Questions drew the kind of men who didn't ask twice. Her phone vibrated again. Another blocked number. A message this time, short enough to be read before she could decide not to. "We can make this clean. Come in alone." Sarah's thumb hovered above the screen. Delete was a muscle memory, the easiest kind of courage. But she didn't delete it. Not yet. She looked up. Across the lot, a flagpole rose from a square of trimmed grass. The American flag hung half lazy in the still air, then stirred as if it had heard something. A small gust snapped it once, hard. It sounded like a distant shot. Sarah exhaled, and for a moment the breath trembled. Not fear, not exactly, but the old weight of choice. There were people who thought she belonged to them. There were people who thought she belonged to history. And now there were people inside those walls who thought she belonged to them too, because they had offered coins like a confession. She started walking, not away, not yet, just toward the building, one measured step at a time, as if she were approaching a fire she'd once sworn she would never stand near again. Her boots, plain, civilian, scuffed at the toes, made soft sounds on the concrete. Halfway to the door she stopped. A black SUV had pulled into the lot without urgency. No sirens, no lights, just the quiet confidence of a vehicle that had never needed to announce itself. It parked 2 rows away, engine still running. The windows were tinted too dark for a normal base vehicle. The driver didn't get out. Sarah didn't move. She didn't have to. The air shifted in the way it always did when someone entered your perimeter with intent. She felt it before she understood it. The SUV's rear passenger window lowered a fraction, not enough to show a face, just enough to show a hand resting on the edge of the glass. No ring, no watch, the skin pale against the dark. Then the window rose again, smooth and silent, as if it had never moved at all. A message without words. We see you. Sarah's jaw tightened. She forced her shoulders down, forced her breathing into something like normal. Then she turned away from the SUV, not in retreat, but in refusal to perform. She walked through the training center doors as if she belonged there, as if she'd always belonged there, as if the last 14 years were a hallway she'd finally finished walking. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, the air smelled like gun oil, rubber mats and a faint metallic tang that lived in indoor ranges the way salt lived near ocean. It was familiar enough to hurt. The main hall had changed since she left it 10 minutes earlier. The laughter was gone. The casual posture of soldiers waiting their turn had stiffened into something more deliberate. People stood as she entered. Not all of them, not in unison, but in coins still glinted on the floor near the shooting area. Small circles of metal that looked inexignific until you understood what they represented. Identity compressed into brass and bronze. Belonging you could hold in your hand. Maria Santos was crouched beside them, still doing what she'd begun to do earlier, photographing each coin for the record. Her hands moved as if she needed the task to keep her from shaking. When Santos saw Sarah, she rose abruptly. "Ma'am." Sarah flinched at the word in a way no one noticed. Ma'am meant rank. Ma'am meant history. Ma'am meant the past, refusing to stay past. "Leave them," Sarah said quietly, nodding at the coins. Santos hesitated. "Sir, Colonel Morrison," he said, "we should secure them." For who?" Sarah asked. Santos swallowed. "For you." Sarah looked at the coins again. For a heartbeat, she saw them differently, not as tribute, but as a weight being placed in her hands without permission. She had carried too many weights already. She had learned how to survive by traveling light. "I didn't ask for them," she said. Santos's expression flickered. Confusion, then shame, then something like stubborn loyalty. "No ma'am, you didn't, but they wanted you to have them anyway." Sarah studied the armorer's face. Santos was younger than she had first guessed. Everyone felt younger now. Time had done something cruel. It had kept moving without her. "I'll take one," Sarah said after a moment. Santos blinked. "One?" Sarah nodded. "The one that was left apart. The one that doesn't match the other." Santos's eyes widened as if Sarah had reached into the back of her mind and pulled out a thought she hadn't realized she was having. She bent, moved coins with careful fingers, and lifted a small bronze piece that looked older than the rest. Worn edges, a surface smoothed by years of handling, not ceremonial, but practical, like a tool. She offered it in both hands. Sarah didn't touch it immediately. She leaned closer, letting the overhead lights glance off the metal. On one side, a simple insignia, not a real-world emblem, not a recognizable unit mark, something generic enough to be safe, but sharp enough to be meaningful. On the other side, a single word, Phoenix. The letters were shallow, as if carved in haste, or as if they had been rubbed down by a thumb over and over for years. Santos's voice shook. "I didn't put it there. It was just separate." Sarah closed her fingers around it. The coin was warm, but the warmth felt wrong, like a fever. "Don't tell anyone you saw this," Sarah said. Santos's mouth opened, then closed again. "Ma'am, don't." Sarah softened the word, but it still carried command. "Not because I don't trust you, because if you tell anyone, someone will come asking you why you know, and you don't deserve that." Santos stared at her, and Sarah saw understanding harden behind her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah nodded once, then turned and walked deeper into the hall. Every step was a negotiation with her own instincts. Part of her wanted to disappear again, leave through a side door, vanish into civilian traffic, change plates, change name, change skin if she had to. Another part of her, smaller, more dangerous, wanted to stay. Purpose, she had said earlier. Real warriors don't need recognition, they just need purpose. The problem was that purpose was the one thing she couldn't manufacture on command. Purpose found you when it wanted to. It was a predator. Colonel Morrison's office door was ajar. Light spilled out in a warm rectangle. Sarah paused outside it, listening. Inside, Morrison spoke in a low voice, clipped and controlled. The voice of a man who had just opened an email that changed his world.
Another voice answered him, tiny through a speaker, words too muffled to catch. Sarah didn't knock. She stepped into the doorway and waited until Morrison looked up. He froze when he saw her. For a moment, he didn't look like a colonel. He looked like the man in the photograph in his office, the one who had come out of captivity thin and haunted. Eyes too old for his face. Recognition flickered across him in layers. Relief, guilt, fear, and something that looked painfully like hope. He ended the call with a quick jab of his thumb and stood. "Sarah, I'm not staying long," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I came back for one thing." Morrison's gaze dropped to her hand, to the coin. His expression tightened. "Where did you get that?" "It was left with the others," Sarah said. "Which means someone wanted me to find it." Morrison's jaw clenched. "I got a message from the Pentagon, Ghost Viper file unsealed, and something called Operation Phoenix activated." Sarah gave a humorless half smile. "So, they've decided to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" "That I'm dead." She rolled the Phoenix coin between her fingers. "That they didn't know where I was. That they weren't waiting for the right moment to pull the leash." Morrison took a step closer. "Do you know what Phoenix?" "I know what it was," Sarah said. "A contingency. A cleanup crew. A promise." Morrison's brow furrowed. "A promise of what?" Sarah's eyes moved past him to the wall behind his desk. A framed map. A unit photo. Small symbols of a life that had continued without her. "A promise that if Ghost Viper ever leaked," she said softly, "they'd burn every loose end in every person who could talk." Morrison's face drained of color. "Sarah, don't," she said, because she recognized the shape his words were taking. Comfort, denial, the belief that systems couldn't be that cold, because people needed to believe their uniforms meant something. Sarah had worn the uniform too. She'd believed in it once. "I'm not here to scare you," she added. "I'm here to warn you." Morrison's throat worked as he swallowed. "They threatened you?" "They implied," Sarah said. "They implied a lot." Morrison stepped closer again, voice hardening. "Who contacted you?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know." "Not exactly." "You recognize the cadence?" "Yes." Sarah's fingers tightened on the coin. "But recognition doesn't mean certainty. It means danger." Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders down the way soldiers did when they needed to make room for clarity. "I saved the message," he said quietly. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You weren't supposed to." "I know," Morrison admitted. "I did it anyway." Sarah studied him, and something inside her shifted, small, reluctant, like a door unlocking one notch. Morrison wasn't naive. He wasn't a young lieutenant chasing approval. He was a man who had learned the cost of obedience, and still chosen to serve, which meant he understood the difference between loyalty and blindness. "Show me," she said. Morrison turned his monitor toward her. The secure message was open, highlighted. Classification codes. Redacted sender line, a subject line that felt like a threat dressed as administration. Sarah read it once. Then again. Her face didn't change, but her breathing did, slightly deeper, slightly slower. She tasted iron at the back of her mouth. "They're moving faster than I thought," she murmured. Morrison watched her closely. "Why now?" Sarah's gaze drifted to the Phoenix coin again. "Because someone talked," she said. "Or someone thinks someone talked. Either way, they don't need truth. They need control." Morrison's voice softened. "Sarah, you don't have to do this alone." She almost laughed. The sound died in her throat. "James, I've been doing this alone for 14 years. I'm not asking about the last 14 years. Morrison said. "I'm asking about now." Sarah looked at him then, really looked. Not at his eagles or his posture, but at the man underneath. The man who had named his daughter after her. The man who had searched every anniversary. The part of her that still wanted to believe in something. Anything. "I can't stay," she said, even as she felt herself wanting to. Morrison's eyes hardened. "Because you think you will put us in danger." Sarah didn't answer. That was answer enough. Morrison leaned forward, hands braced on the desk. "If Phoenix is real, if they're coming, then leaving doesn't protect us. It just removes the one person in the room who understands the threat." Sarah's fingers went still. The coin stopped rolling. "That's an argument," she said softly. It's not a plan. Morrison held her gaze. Then help me build one. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the quiet hum of electronics and the distant echo of activity in the range. Someone laughed nervously, somewhere down the hall, the sound sharp and quickly cut off. Sarah turned her head slightly. Listen, she could feel the building again, its shape in her mind. Doors, corners, lines of sight, people, old habits. She looked back at Morrison. Lock your door. Morrison blinked, then obeyed without question. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. Sarah stepped closer to the desk and lowered her voice. There are two possibilities, she said. Either Phoenix is a unit that's been sitting dormant and now they've been activated to find me, or Phoenix is a cover name for something else. Something else like what? Sarah's eyes flicked to the ceiling as if she could see through it. A purge, she said. Morrison's face tightened. They wouldn't. They would, Sarah said flatly. They already did. They buried Ghost Viper. They buried me. They buried the questions. Now something is digging. Morrison swallowed. What do you want from me? Sarah hesitated, then made herself say it. I need access, she said. Not to classified systems, not to your command authority. I need a place to think, somewhere inside your perimeter, where I can see what's happening without being seen. Morrison stared. You want to hide here? Sarah's mouth tightened. I want to use your facility the way they used me. Morrison's eyes softened, and that softness was almost worse than anger. You came here for me, he said quietly. Didn't you? Sarah didn't answer. Morrison exhaled. There's a storage office behind the memorial wall, he said. Most people think it's a maintenance closet. It has a secure door and a private line. If you need to disappear inside this building, that's the place. Sarah's heart thumped once. The memorial wall, the ghost. How long before someone notices? She asked. Morrison's expression turned grim. People already noticed. The video Walsh recorded. She says she deleted it, but I don't trust that. Hawkins will be reported. Bradley will be questioned. Rumors will spread by lunchtime. And Phoenix will hear, Sarah said. Morrison nodded. Yes. Sarah rolled the coin again, slower this time. If they're already here, she said, then we don't have time for rumors. Morrison leaned closer. Tell me the truth, he said. What did you keep? Sarah's eyes lifted. Her voice was steady, but the room felt colder. Evidence, she said. Morrison didn't move. Evidence of what? Sarah's gaze dropped to his desk, to the neat stack of paperwork he'd been pretending mattered. Evidence that Ghost Viper was compromised from the inside. Evidence that someone sold those prisoners. Evidence that the extraction was meant to fail. Morrison's face went pale. Who? Sarah's mouth tightened. I never proved the name, she said. Not fully, but I proved the pipeline. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. And you kept it. I kept it because it was the only reason I was allowed to stay alive, Sarah said. They gave me a medal in a grave, because it was cleaner than a trial. But they also made sure I understood the terms. Morrison's hands curled into fists on the desk. And now Phoenix wants it. Sarah nodded once. Or they want to make sure it never surfaces. Morrison stared at her for a long time. Then he said something that surprised her. Then we surface it. Sarah blinked. James. Morrison's voice hard. I spent 3 years in a cage, because someone decided American lives were a bargaining chip, he said. I watched people die because someone failed, or chose to fail. If there's proof, we don't hide it. We don't let them bury it again. Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that answer. She hadn't expected him to choose fire. Do you know what happens to people who try? She asked. Morrison's gaze didn't waver. Yes. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time since she'd stepped into Fort Liberty, she felt something like relief. Not safety, not comfort, relief. The kind you felt when you realized you weren't the only one awake. Outside the office, the training center's PA system crackled softly. Someone testing a mic. The sound made both of them pause, listening. Then a knock struck the door. Not loud, but controlled. 3 taps. Morrison and Sarah froze. Another knock. This one firmer. Colonel Morrison. A voice called from the hall. Male. Calm. Too calm. This is Captain Warren, liaison. I'm here with a directive regarding Operation Phoenix. Sarah's blood went cold. Morrison's eyes flicked to Sarah. A silent question. What do we do? Sarah's mind snapped into motion. Exits, hiding places, angles, time. She took one step toward the back of the office, toward the wall with the framed photograph. She didn't look away from Morrison, but she spoke softly. Fast. Don't open it, she murmured. Not yet. Ask for credentials by rank. Morrison's jaw tightened. He straightened, voice steady as he called back through the door. Captain Warren, show me your orders. Slide them under the door. A pause. The quiet stretched. Then paper slid along the carpet, appearing beneath the crack. Morrison didn't bend to pick it up immediately. He looked at Sarah again. Something passed between them. Two people acknowledging without words that the next choice might cost everything. Sarah moved like a shadow toward the side cabinet, where Morrison kept keys and secure storage card. She didn't touch anything yet. She just positioned herself. Ready. Morrison finally bent and retrieved the paper. His eyes scanned it quickly. His face didn't change, but Sarah could see the muscles tighten along his jaw. It's real, he said quietly. Sarah didn't need to ask what that meant. Outside, Captain Warren's voice stayed polite. Sir, I'd prefer to speak in person. It's urgent. Morrison's hand hovered near the lock. He looked at Sarah one more time. Sarah held his gaze, then nodded once, slow, deliberate. If they were here, running wasn't the only answer. Sometimes you opened the door to see who had come hunting, because knowing the hunter mattered. Morrison unlocked the door. Captain Warren stood in the hall, alone, mid-30s, clean-cut, hair the color of sand, eyes too flat, too practical. He wore camouflage like everyone else, but the uniform sat on him differently, too pristine, too intentional, as if it were a costume he had learned to wear. His gaze slid past Morrison's shoulder, searching the room. He smiled, polite as a knife. Colonel, he said, thank you for your time. State your purpose, Morrison replied, his voice cold. Captain Warren's smile didn't fade. Operation Phoenix has been activated, he said. We're here to secure all individuals and materials connected to Ghost Viper. Morrison's posture stiffened. On whose authority? Warren's eyes flicked down the hall, then back. On authority above mine, sir. His voice remained calm. We have reason to believe an individual connected to Ghost Viper is present at this facility. Morrison didn't blink. And you intend to do what? Exactly. Warren's smile widened slightly. Protect them, he said. Behind Morrison, Sarah stood in shadow near the cabinet, silent, unseen, exactly where she'd lived for 14 years. Her hand closed around the Phoenix coin in her pocket. The metal bit into her palm. Protect them. It was always the same word, used like a blanket to cover a blade. Sarah inhaled slowly. She felt the building around her, the people inside it, the men outside it. She felt the old war stirring under the floorboards, patient, hungry, and she realized something with sudden clarity. Phoenix hadn't found her today. Phoenix had been waiting for her to stop hiding. In the hall, Captain Warren continued smoothly. We'll need a full roster, he said. We'll need surveillance access, and we'll need to speak with anyone who witnessed the earlier incident. Morrison's eyes stayed hard. I will comply with lawful orders, he said. I will not allow harassment or intimidation of my personnel. Warren's gaze sharpened. Understood. Then Warren's eyes drifted again, just slightly, toward the cabinet where Sarah stood. He didn't see her, not directly, but his attention lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. Sarah's stomach tightened. He was trained. He was scanning. He wasn't here to protect. He was here to contain. Outside the office, the training center hummed on. Soldiers walking, doors opening, the ordinary noise of a Saturday morning that had become anything but ordinary. Sarah watched Captain Warren and understood a truth that settled in her bones like ice. The story didn't end with her being seen. It began there, and now she had a choice that felt less like a crossroads, and more like an ambush. She could step forward and reveal herself again, and let Phoenix close its hands around her. Or she could do what she'd always done. Disappear, gather what she needed, and strike from the shadow where ghosts were strongest. Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. Captain Warren, he said. You'll wait here while I consult my legal counsel. Warren's smile didn't reach his eye. Of course, Colonel. Sarah's gaze met Morrison's, just for a heartbeat. Morrison's expression was steady, but his eyes carried a question he couldn't ask out loud. Are you still running? Sarah's answer was not words. It was a shift in her stance, a silent decision. She stepped backward into the deeper shadow of the office, moving toward the rear door Morrison had mentioned, the one behind the memorial wall, not running, repositioning. Outside, Captain Warren waited with perfect patience. Inside, Sarah Chen, ghost, moved toward the place where the dead were honored, where secrets were stored, where walls remembered. In her pocket, the phoenix coin pressed against her palm like a warning. And somewhere beyond the base perimeter, the black SUV idled, engine purring as if it had all the time in the world. Because Phoenix did, Phoenix always